All right. We are all set. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. We have 5 primary items to consider today, 2 of which contain sensitive information and will be discussed in camera. The first is the Office of the Auditor General's semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. There's no presentation for this item, so we will go directly to questions for the OAG. Audit Committee members will have the first opportunity to pose questions, followed by other members of Council. After questions to the OAG, we'll go to questions for City staff. We'll follow this order of questions for all of today's items. After questions are complete, we will vote to receive the report and submit it to Council for consideration. Our second item is the audit of the development application review process. Auditor General Nathalie Goujon will introduce the item and hand it off to Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein for a presentation of about 12 minutes. Following questions, we'll then vote to receive the report and submit it to Council for consideration. Our third item is a follow-up report on enterprise risk management. Auditor General Goujon will introduce the item and Deputy Auditor General Gorenstein will provide a presentation of about 8 minutes before we go to questions. We'll then vote to receive the report and submit it to Council for consideration. Our final 2 items will be discussed in camera. Those items are a follow-up report to the audit of cybersecurity and a follow-up report to the cybersecurity investigation. These items will be considered together in closed session. When we resume the open meeting, we will vote to receive both items and submit them to Council for consideration. Thank you, everyone. Let's get started. I see we have regrets from Councillor Hill. I'll ask the committee coordinator to call the roll.
Councillor Brown?
Here.
Councillor Carr?
Present.
Councillor Hill? Councillor Kavanagh?
Present.
Councillor Kitts?
Here.
Vice Chair Hubley?
Here.
Chair Curry?
Here. Thank you. All right, so we will go to our first item then. Auditor General. Oh, sorry, flipped the wrong page. First, we have a motion to add reports, and then I will go to the Auditor General for a comment. As an initial housekeeping matter, I'll ask for a motion to add the Office of the Auditor General reports to the agenda as they were distributed and published after the agenda. Vice Chair, could you please move that motion?
Thank you, Chair. Be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of the following reports distributed and published after the agenda pursuant to subsection 89(3) of the Procedures Bylaw, being bylaw number 2025-100, to allow for the consideration of these matters. The Office of the Auditor General semi-annual report or on follow-up procedures, file number ACS 2025-OAG-BVG-009. Office of the Auditor General Audit of Development Application Review, file number ACS 2025-OAG-BVG-010. Office of the Auditor General Follow-Up Report, Audit of Enterprise Risk Management, file ACS 2025-OAG-BVG-011. Office of the Auditor General Follow-Up Report, Cybersecurity Investigation, file number ACS 2025-OAG-BVG-013. And finally, Office of the Auditor General OAG Follow-Up Report, Audit of Cybersecurity, file number ACS 2025-OAG-BVG-012. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hubley. Is that carried? Carried. Thank you. All right. Declarations of interest. None that I have received. Confirmation of minutes from Friday. So Audit Committee minutes 12, Friday, June the 6th, 2025. Are those minutes carried? Carried. All right. Office of the Auditor General, semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. I know there's no presentation, but Auditor General, did you have any comment?
Chair, no, I have no comments at this time. I'd be happy to take any questions that committee members have.
All right, Audit Committee, any questions? Councillor Kavanagh?
No, I just wanted to thank you for the follow-ups and how important they are, that we keep track of what still needs to be processed. I just wanted to know how we compare to other municipalities on this.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor. It's a very good question and one that I'm not sure I can give you an accurate answer on. So if it's okay, I will take that one back and get back to you. What I would say is, what I can say historically speaking, my colleagues in other municipalities have told me that it's a little bit of a pain point for them. And what we have seen over the past few years is we've introduced our new process of following up only on those elements that are completed and having the semi-annual report that we are seeing significant improvements and greater action from management.
Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions then. So, any questions for city staff on this item? I don't see any question for city staff. Okay. So the report recommendation is that the audit committee recommend council receive the semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. Is this item carried? Carried. All right. Item 4.2, Office of the Auditor General, Audit of Development Application Review.
Merci. Bonjour, Madame la Présidente et chers membres du Comité de la Vérification. The first report that we would like to present to you today is the audit of the Development Application Review. I'd firstly like to take a moment to thank city staff as well as stakeholders that participated in our audit, this particular audit, but also the rest of the audits that we will be presenting to you today. I will now pass the presentation over to Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein and Audit Manager Corey Richardson, who will walk you through the results of our work. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Thank you and good morning. Ontario's Planning Act is the primary provincial legislation that grants the authority for land use planning to municipal governments. The Planning Act requires that the city establish planning documents like its official plan, as well as the zoning bylaw, which establishes the rules and regulations of development. There have been a number of recent legislative changes impacting the Planning Act and the development application process that the city has been navigating over the past several years. Development applications are reviewed by the city's planning services to ensure that the proposed development is consistent with legislation and planning principles. Additionally, subject matter experts across the city contribute to reviews, ensuring proposed development is appropriate from a technical perspective and compatible with municipal assets. We thought we would give a high-level overview of the development application review process. However, a more detailed process map can be found in an appendix to our report. First, although no longer mandatory, the city strongly encourages pre-consultation with city staff to identify the scope of the project. The applicant, when ready, submits the development application through planning services, along with all required fees, studies, plans, and documents for a completeness check. The application then undergoes a detailed circulation and technical review by city and external subject matter experts who confirm that the proposed development is technically appropriate and compatible. Reviews often result in comments to applicants that must be addressed before moving forward and can include several iterations. The city prepares a report summarizing the application, public comments, and technical reviews. Depending on the type of application, the decision to approve the application may be made by management through delegated authority, council for decision, or the Committee of Adjustment for minor applications. If there are objections to the decision, the applicant may appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. For applications relating to lot development, the process continues after approval. This includes the development and registration of agreements, submission of securities, insurance, and in the issuance of permits. Next slide, please. The objective of this audit was to provide reasonable assurance that the city has the necessary processes, controls, and resources to effectively and efficiently manage the development application review activities. The scope of this audit including testing the most common types of development applications, specifically official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, site plan controls, plans of subdivision, as well as minor variances and severances. The process to determine development charges and any processes related to cash in lieu of parkland funds were not specifically examined as part of this audit. To better understand land planning, our office consulted with an independent planning firm that had no specific dealings with the city. Additionally, as part of our work, we conducted interviews with a sample of external stakeholders within the Ottawa development industry, including planning consulting firms, major developers, conservation authorities, and utilities. I will now pass the presentation over to Corey to walk through the results of our audit. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Joanne. So the first finding relates to post-approval agreements for site plans and plans of subdivision. The agreement preparation and registration is a crucial part of the process for city and developers. Agreements outline the obligations and conditions that must be met by developers, and registration of these agreements is often the key milestone to secure financing, obtain permits, or to sell units. During our analysis of the internal data, and as shown in the chart on the slide here, since 2002 or 2022, the average time to register an agreement after a site plan has been approved has increased from 284 days to 649 days. Over the same time, the number of agreements registered annually has decreased. So several factors have contributed to these increased timelines. Internally, there's a lack of dedicated resources for development files within Legal Services Department. Additionally, inconsistent conditions or late consultations with planning services and unclear file tracking can further contribute to delays. Externally, the increasing complexity of site plans from intensification can complicate reviews. On the developer side, incomplete or inadequate submissions from applicants needed to prepare agreements or attempts to skip the line can also interrupt the process. Ultimately, extended timelines can often result in legal risk to the city, as well as higher construction costs for developers, slowing down the availability of housing supply and ultimately impacting affordability. Next slide, please. Second group of findings relates to the review of applications. As mentioned earlier, submission materials from applicants are reviewed by internal and external subject matter experts. In most cases, the planning file lead will defer to the subject matter experts, but could potentially override recommendations or decisions. It has not been formally established which comments must be addressed to the satisfaction of the subject matter expert and which can be overruled by the planning file lead. An example of this was demonstrated in our sample file testing, where the rationale for the planning lead not following the recommendation of the subject matter expert was not documented. Without formally established authorities for decisions within the development application process, it could lead to inappropriate decisions. Additionally, as part of our testing, the resolution of comments from the subject matter experts, we noted that while associated plans and studies provided by the applicant are maintained in the city file, a formalized mechanism to reconcile the comments is not maintained. We understand that this clearance can come in the form of an email or verbally to the file lead, but without evidence of acceptance by the subject matter expert, it's difficult for the file lead to demonstrate that the file was ready to proceed to the next step. Additionally, without this documentation, situations where the file lead overrides the comment or decision may also not be supported. Ultimately, this increases the risk to the city that the city cannot demonstrate that it completed the necessary due diligence and to enable the file to proceed to the next step in the process. So legislative changes and strategic priorities have increased pressure on the timelines associated with review and approval of development applications. Our consultations with internal and external subject matter experts have demonstrated that the increased complexity of applications, it is challenging to meet the established timelines and provide quality feedback. The expertise needed to sufficiently review higher risk areas, for example, for water infrastructure, is often at the operational level, and these resources are not dedicated to development review. Insufficient due diligence by city subject matter experts could result in the city approving development that does not comply with internal terms of reference or other policies and increases risks to the city. Next slide, please. So our final finding relates to monitoring and reporting. Planning Services annually presents statistics by application type to committee and council via the Departmental Delegated Authority report, but the annual report does not currently include specific key performance metrics that are relevant to internal and external stakeholders. Examples of such indicators would include the net processing time, the total elapsed time to decision or approval, and the time from approval to agreement registration. So in order to isolate bottlenecks and take proactive actions to address process challenges, a complete view on the key application review is needed. This is also crucial for council and other stakeholders to assess the state of the program, given the strategic importance of housing development. Next slide, please. So in summary, there's immense pressure to expedite development approvals. At the same time, the city is navigating ongoing legislative changes while balancing council's strategic objectives to increase housing with the city's fundamental role as a regulator and steward of municipal assets. We made 7 recommendations aimed at increasing the efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency of the program, and management has agreed to all. we'd be happy to take questions now. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. I'll note that we don't have any correspondence on this item, nor do we have any delegations. So we can go to questions for the Office of the Auditor General. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. When I'm on planning committee and we have files of every size, and I don't know how that's taken into consideration because you can have small files that take a long time, often because the person is not as experienced, they're doing it themselves, or it's more complicated for them. Or you can have a big file that goes like that, because it's very professional. It's a larger developer, been there many times. How is scale of the development taken into consideration in this audit?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so with the tracking that's available in the map system, you can break it down by the complexity of, like, for instance, a site plan. So we looked at those subtypes, but and there's also tracking of when it's in the city's hands or when it's in the developer's hands. So those are also key things to look at when judging the success of a development process.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. I'm interested in understanding, I guess, a little bit more context around how the audit was undertaken and how it actually progressed, because planning is a maze for anybody on the outside. It's definitely a maze sometimes for councillors and folks on the inside. So I'd like for you to add a little bit more color, if you can, to the audit process and really how you rolled it out.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor. I'll start off, and I'm sure my team will add to my response. As we do with all our audits, we take a look at all the key inputs. So in this case, as you mentioned, it's a very complex process and one that spans much more than just the planning department. From our execution, we obviously looked at files and documents and policies and procedures, but we spoke with individuals from planning, we spoke with individuals from legal, from the various subject matter areas such as water, for example. We also went and spoke with various stakeholders. So we spoke with a sample of developers, we spoke with most of the conservation authorities, and we also spoke with utility companies. But I look to my team to see if they'd like to add to that.
Sure, I'll add a little bit more. Maybe even Corey has more. I think in terms of selecting samples and looking at files, like we did a significant amount of data analysis of the information in the map system, but that even is a bit of a sordid tale because files span multiple years, and now we had the added complexity of various legislative rules impacting the files at different points. So we really did try to look at things, and we looked at it from a risk perspective, and we looked at it from a volume perspective and a significance perspective in order to pick a sample or a representative sample of what we could look at in terms of files, keeping in mind the context constantly. And we had lots of meetings with planning representatives to make sure we always kept the context in mind.
No, thank you very much. And I did appreciate the few lines that you had in the audit that spoke to the legislative changes that have rolled out over the last few years. And I think that has created great opportunities to be more efficient, but certainly did throw a wrench into the system, and the city had to move forward quickly with implementing that legislation. I know Chair Leeper is here, and he's the man tasked with leading this whole show for the past few years. So I think it was a very interesting audit. I think it was timely, but given how much changes, in this certain sector for us, I think there are more changes that likely can be made. And I will have questions for staff, but when I read this, I was trying to put myself into the shoes of the auditors, trying to take all of this in. And because it is such a complex maze, I was quite impressed with the information that came out. I understood it and how it was presented. So I appreciate how you've crafted the audit for someone like me to be able to read it. But certainly I'll have some questions for staff. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Vice Chair Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Auditor General, I'm going to ask you Through this review, you obviously highlighted, and I appreciate your honesty here, you highlighted a number of the issues. For example, the time to get a site plan approved going from 284 days to 649 days. During that time, there's been all kinds of studies and, we got to do this and we got to do that. But clearly, we're not making progress. We're going in a backwards direction here. Did you walk away with this with any feeling that staff have that message and are trying to do something to turn that around and start to reduce the time so that we can get the housing that our residents really need?
Chair, Vice Chair, thank you very much for the question. I would say, first of all, I don't want to lose sight of the aspect that we are seeing improvements with a number of types of applications. Obviously, the numbers that we're highlighting with regards to site plan control and plans of subdivision are obviously a little concerning. That being said, there's context in there that's also really important, which is regards to a lot of the projects coming forward to the city are more complex due to the types of lands that are available. And we are cognizant that there's risk to the city if we move too quick and we don't take it into consideration all the key factors that we need to. I do think staff take this very seriously. They're very well aware of council's priority. That being said, a few of our recommendations do highlight a need to review resourcing and prioritization of those resources when it comes to some of these key areas. We talked about bottlenecks a little bit, unfortunately, with regards to legal services. And I know the city solicitor's here and he's got to take away from this audit in order to look at how his team can help move things forward. Obviously, we know that many areas in the city are taxed when it comes to workload. So we are cognizant of that. It's not an easy fix. We have a massive budget issue that council will be faced with this year. So I would say that they are taking this seriously, and the purpose of our recommendations is to help them get to that stage of continuing to approve, make the process more efficient, and get these houses built as quickly as possible without impacting the overall affordability.
So if all these recommendations are implemented and not studied further and, reports requested and all the things we do to delay making changes, how soon do you see that number dropping? And are you willing to make any kind of prediction? Like, is progress dropping from 649 days to 648? Or is progress getting back to 284 within months? What should we consider progress here?
Chair, I'd like to state that the development application review process that we commented on is only one aspect of obviously getting a home built or homes built in the city. So I wouldn't say that our audit is going to fix everything. I would expect to see much more than a day drop off if we want to see things moving in the right direction. And I think staff would agree with that. And I think that is their intended goal and objective.
I would agree with you that your audit doesn't fix this. We need action by staff to fix this. I'm hoping, because I do really like your audit, I'm hoping that the recommendations in there are part of what staff can use to fix it. I was hoping to get some indication, like where you were in the meetings with them, that did you walk away feeling that they get this, or is this going to be, well, we'll wait for the follow-up audit and then we'll start making some progress. I'll come to the example that you've used in the report about legal services. I've had lots of discussions with staff about that. Lots of people have, from the industry to counselors around the table, everybody saying, why is such a backlog with legal services? Mr. Huxley can tell us that he needs the resources. Report's done, as you highlight here. It identifies the need for 33 additional resources. Those people are hired, but all those resources went to other departments besides legal. If legal is one of the biggest issues in this, how is the decision made not to give them resources? Did you have any indication as to, because you looked at that, was there any indication as to why legal didn't get those any of those resources?
So I'll let Joanne add to this, but obviously our report highlights that there were a significant number of resources adding to planning, which I think that has assisted some of the process, which is why you're seeing some significant reductions in other types of applications. Joanne can add a little bit of additional flavor, but what I do want to say with regards to getting these recommendations actioned, At the end of the day, we can report the information. We will do our follow-up work and we will report back on the results as well. It is to all of you as members of council as to what you want to do from a priority perspective with regards to funds and with regards to holding management accountable for these particular actions. I can report, and that is my kind of mandate with regards to assisting council in holding the administration accountable. It is then up to council on that next step. But I look to Joanne to see if she'd like to add with regards to a little bit of what we learned during the audit.
Sorry, and the only thing I'd like to add, and I'm sure management can speak to this, but even as part of, as quickly as, discussing our findings, I definitely recognize that legal services and planning services were in discussions about how to address this. So this isn't waiting. They're in conversations now.
Okay. And as part of your audit, any of your audits that you do a really good job at identifying what our risks are and often making suggestions what we can do to reduce the risk. Was it considered a risk when you did this review and saw these alarming results? Given what's going on in the province right now, where the province is taking over school boards because of this kind of performance, did you identify any risks that the province might step in and take over many of our planning functions because of this?
Chair, I would not say that that was a consideration during our audit. You are correct, though. Our audits are meant to be risk-based. So we do a risk assessment. We identify where we think the greatest risks are, and we look at those particular areas. And same with our reporting. They're meant to report on what we believe to be the highest risks. You don't see all the nitty-gritty of all the other little minutia findings that we have in the process. We focus on those that we think are going to provide the greatest impact to the city moving forward. And that's how we help, at least from our side, management prioritize what we've found during our audits.
Okay, thank you very much. And Chair, I'll have questions of staff. Some will be the same questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Another great audit. Just a couple quick questions. I know that usually when you set the scope of an audit, you do sort of some benchmarking. You also look at what other municipalities have done. Are there any other municipalities that have audited this process sort of in a similar fashion, especially since the incoming changes provincially to sort of accelerate housing?
Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor. I do not believe so. I think we are one of the few, at least in Ontario, that have taken a look at this particular process. Obviously, housing in general is top of mind for all of my fellow Auditor Generals. Just looking to my colleague here, Corey, to see if there was anything else from the benchmarking work that we did.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, it would have been nice to have another audit to help us out, but no, we didn't. Not any of the major municipalities. I don't think have done of the whole process, but we did work with our planning consultants to do benchmarking of what management is doing in planning in different municipalities. But in terms of audits, no, we didn't. Nothing on the full process.
Amazing. Okay, so once again, at the forefront of auditing within the municipalities in Ontario. Just a quick question. I noticed the Committee of Adjustment process talked about the 90-day timeframe. Is that were you just looking at the timeframe for staff to prepare the report and not the whole Committee of Adjustment process, because that's slightly outside of, given its third-party status? I'm just wondering if you could just explain that a bit to me.
That is a great question, Councillor, and my team's going to be laughing because you just proved me wrong on something. It's okay, it's an inside joke, but we did look at the Committee of Adjustment and past that 90-day period. My jurisdiction is Auditor General. Obviously, not necessarily the decisions of the committee per se, just like Council. I cannot necessarily question the overall priorities of that committee, but we did review that area and we did not have any major findings to report.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, no, I just wanted to understand that, because certainly as councillors, our role with Committee of Adjustment being third party is very different. So I was just trying to understand that a little bit. Thank you. I guess you had a bet that nobody would ask that question.
I did, and
Okay.
I think I owe Corey something as a result, so.
Excellent. All right, I'll take a piece of that too. No, I'm just joking. Okay. And my last question is, can you just confirm when the audit started?
That is a very good question, because I know we did some preliminary planning, but it would have been last summer.
Okay, so the new GM of planning was aware of this audit when she agreed to take the job.
Can you repeat that question, sir?
So the new GM of planning was aware of this audit going on when she agreed to take the job.
She had the pleasure, Chair, of coming into a draft report. So
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the audit. I want to go straight to the section 2.1 with respect to development review. The line that strikes me is insufficient due diligence by city subject matter experts could result in the city approving development that does not comply with internal terms of reference or other policies and increases risk and cost to the city. Developers are pushing us hard to get through development review more quickly, to complete our review of technical studies, for example, more quickly, to the point where it has been suggested out there in the industry that the city might not even review technical documents anymore, where if their iron ring signs off on a technical study, that we should simply accept that as being valid. I wonder first, what is the level of risk that you are warning us about with that paragraph? Is this a really significant risk that should keep us up at night? And then secondly, besides adding more resources to the planning department to speed up development reviews, adding more resources to our subject matter experts departments in order to speed up development reviews, are there other solutions with respect to reviewing technical studies that you contemplated?
Chair, I'll start off, and I'm sure Joanne and Corey would like to add to what I have to say. I would say when it comes to the subject matter experts, first and foremost, obviously similar to the aspect that we mentioned with regards to legal, because they are doing this a little bit more on the side of their desks, that is causing slowdowns. So number one, that would be part of the issue. Second of all, if we are asking them to speed up review, if we're asking them to do a more condensed review, there is greater risk at the end of the day to the city that we are missing particular aspects. If I start thinking about, for example, water, if a development's coming with a new stormwater management, for example, if we don't take sufficient time to review that, the city may be on the hook for something for years to come that has ramifications. I'll look to Joanne or Corey if they'd like to add to that.
Thank you. I think, I would say along the same lines. I think where we, wanted to warn about or suggest there's increased risk is when it is really to do with the assets that ultimately the city is going to inherit and have to maintain and ensuring that they're comfortable with the design of these and how these are going to play out, because it could result in cost as well as other concerns. So that's what we wanted to highlight. Obviously, technical studies and things like that from the actual building of the development, I appreciate that. We do absolutely appreciate that management does, when there's professional engineers and things like that, there's reliance on that at various stages of the process. So we just wanted to highlight when it becomes the city's asset in the end.
Okay. And are there mitigations in place that you've seen right now to ensure that we don't take on ownership of assets that we haven't properly reviewed?
Thank you for the question. That's obviously the point of these reviews. So, the due diligence and making sure, and hence our recommendations that truly when the subject matter expert, who is the subject matter expert, is comfortable with the final result of the final study, even though that might take longer, that's the mitigation.
Okay. I think it's interesting because some of the additional resourcing that I think I understand you've suggested might be in order isn't going to be found in the Planning and Housing Committee's budget. We might see some of that additional funding in the PWIC and other budgets as well. So worth some further discussion. That was my question. Thank you very much for the audit.
Thank you very much. I just have a couple of quick questions. The recommendation number 4, the management response was that there were funds allocated to departments. That was the response, right? And I'm wondering if in your audit you actually looked at that after seeing that response. I'm looking at recommendation 4, where it says funds were provided in the 2024 budget to departments for subject matter expert resources. would it be would you say you then looked into that and you have anything more to say there? It wasn't enough money. It wasn't allocated to specific, like to the human beings that would be considered an expert, or just basically resources that they may use? I mean, I found that response needing more elaboration, and I'll certainly ask staff, but I wondered what you did with that response.
Chair, at the end of the day, we were looking at the results that we were seeing, right? And so we were still seeing that there were significant bottlenecks and issues through our discussions with the various subject matter experts that we spoke to that seemed to be a resounding issue still to this day. So regardless of perhaps increased budgets in 2024 or 2025, we're still hearing the same message. So we're expecting to see the same result. But I look to my team to see if there's I think they're agreeing with my statement, but I think, yes, management may be able to add a little bit more to that. But at the end of the day, we are still seeing and hearing the same messaging.
Okay, and the last question I have is, councillors get a lot of comments back from developers on so many applications, especially if you're on planning committee, where developers will say, a day for us is $100,000. So they tell us things like this. And so when you look at, well, if it's 600 days, like, do the math. And so then they will say, and you can see how that then would mean we may not invest, or we may not build another building. We may not do another subdivision. Then you can see how that would relate to how we may not then have enough housing numbers, houses built to meet our targets, which then means we don't get provincial funding. So you can see how this is all related. So I'm asking you, really, when you were doing your audit, did you get the sense that the experts and staff you were talking to really appreciated that?
Chair, I would say I think everybody in the process understands some of the pain points, that obviously the longer something takes, the more it's going to cost, and whether or not developers are still going to want to continue into specific projects. I think that's always a risk. But I think as we highlight in our report, we understand the, I guess, complex situation that the city is in. They're a regulator. They're, with regards to building of homes, they're required to maintain municipal assets. So they've got a role there. And then they also have a role in trying to meet housing targets. Those aren't necessarily always aligned, nor are they mutually exclusive. Obviously, I think they understand where developers are coming from. They understand the need to build more homes, but there's also risk mitigation that the city needs to ensure that they do, and due diligence that's required. So I think it's a little bit of a happy medium. We understand both sides, and I think it's trying to find that middle ground.
All righty. Okay. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Provoke more questions. I'm wondering if overall the issue is that they're understaffed, that because these deadlines, the bottlenecks are related to there's not enough people to do the job. Is that part of the conclusion?
Chair, I would say yes, but I also want to caution, there's a reason why we ask staff to go back and do analysis. They may not have the right resources for this particular area. That doesn't necessarily always mean they need more bodies. Because we haven't, in this case, I haven't looked at legal services as a whole. I can't say that legal services has other areas where they might have some flex where they can retrain or reallocate. We are cognizant. Again, I'll use the example of legal services, where it takes time to build up the required expertise in order to be able to review these types of agreements. So it's, I hate to say it's not necessarily a quick fix from that particular perspective. Same with the subject matter experts. Without me looking at, infrastructure in detail, the water department, knowing how much, leeway stormwater management team might have with regards to their resourcing. I can't say definitively whether or not they actually do need more resources as a whole, or if it's a reallocation of resources and retraining.
Understood. There has to be expertise with all those positions.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, councillors, questions for management? Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to start with legal services, building on the few comments that Councillor Hubley mentioned, and I'll preface it with, we've made some improvement with legal services on some of the smaller files at the Rural Affairs Committee. We approved an external route, so smaller legal files can proceed a little quicker through the system. Hasn't really worked, and that's because the city still needs to do a final check. So even if an external legal firm provides the legal expertise we need, the city still sits on it. I don't know if it's a lack of resources or a lack of time management, but I often get messages from developers, big and small, people with one application or people with multiple homes. I get calls from city staff asking me to poke legal to get an update. I know it was referenced in the audit. And so what are we going to see from legal services to make sure these files move forward quickly? And I'm not saying cut corners, but quickly, so we are actually fulfilling that client service mandate. And are we going to look at external law firms that can actually take ownership of these legal applications, do the work, and have some kind of expedited review once it comes back to the city?
Chair, thank you for the question. Tout d'abord, nous remercions la vérificatrice générale et son équipe pour le rapport de l'audit et les recommendations. We'd like to thank the Auditor General and her team for the report and her recommendations. And by extension, we thank City Council and Committee for the matters that come before Audit Committee today. Finally, General Manager Wallace and I both thank our teams whose work helps build the City of Ottawa, including through development agreements. Chair, we accept and welcome the recommendations of the Auditor General and are taking concrete steps to act on them. These recommendations provide a valuable path forward in strengthening our approach and accelerating progress on housing priorities. Nous acceptons les recommandations de l'audit et prenons des mesures concrètes pour y donner suite. We have respect to the question from the councillor. This relates to recommendation number 1 in the audit. I've already started a resourcing analysis to better ensure that legal services aligns with the organizational priorities, including housing. I can advise that Audit Committee that Legal Services now has in place 2 lawyers, both with considerable experience, who will be dedicated to development agreements. In addition, Chair, as part of this resourcing analysis, I reassigned within Legal Services another lawyer into the planning group, and I anticipate soon announcing a further lawyer in that regard. This is to address immediate needs, but also to better develop planning and development agreement experience in-house. To the councillor's question about agreements, we've made considerable progress on the Committee of Adjustment matters. We have upped the staffing on our law clerks and the resourcing and modification of duties with respect to lawyers, I think, has addressed that particular issue. We have an external law firm that does work as an option on Committee of Adjustment agreements, severances. Those agreements done by the external law firm, just to clarify, are not reviewed further by Legal Services. That's a project that is to the other firm. But ostensibly, the resourcing analysis that I've heard members of Audit Committee express concerns about Legal Services, we are dedicating 2 lawyers with experience to address the issue that it takes time for lawyers to develop in this area. So we're going to use the talent that we have and refocus them on development agreements. In addition to reassigning lawyers, we will have additional staffing, and in part in thanks to resourcing that we received through the Housing Acceleration Fund. That is being most timely, and I'm thankful for that funding. In addition, and I anticipate a question from another member of Audit Committee, we are also looking at developing and enhancing our articling student program, which will provide a more robust experiential role for our students with development agreements. Legal Services has 2 articling students, both of which have recently started their term, and both of them come to us with very good foundation. They both have taken municipal and planning law in their law school years. And so you can see the talent that we're trying to develop, Chair, is both to address the short-term needs, but also to develop talent in this area of law long-term. So I trust that may respond to that question.
Thank you very much for the response. I'm interested to learn that the city doesn't do another review, because I've heard several times that even with the external route, there's still a delay on the city side. So I can certainly take that offline.
I'm Chair, I'm happy to have that further clarification offline with the councillor and anyone else who wishes to review that particular item.
Thank you. And further in the audit, we read about a dashboard that's being set up so there's more transparency as to where things are. That way I'm not getting phone calls as a counselor from city planners going, can you poke legal and find out, because we can't get a response. Is this dashboard, and I know there's a bit of a delay to get it up and running, and that's okay. I know we're moving towards the LMS system. But in the meantime, what would be planning services recommendation for me as a counselor? Who should I be calling to get an update? Or is there something that a general manager can provide in the way of instruction or direction to staff to ensure that that communication starts a little bit faster? I know it was referenced in the report, but yesterday I got a message saying, hey, can you poke staff? So what are we doing today to make sure that we start ramping this up? So when we do move to that more holistic dashboard, the expectation and that culture has already been implemented.
Through the chair, thanks for the question, Councillor. So the dashboard does exist. It was launched in July of this year, so it would have happened after the auditor had her draft findings start moving. The idea is the dashboard will be iterative and get better and more complete information. But what it shows right now is that it identifies where we are in the process. It talks about the provincial set timelines as it relates to site plan and zoning, and demonstrates that we are meeting those timelines. We're monitoring actively how we're meeting those timelines, and as well as at different phases of the process as we try to get to those 30, 60, 90-day timelines that would be set out in legislation. The idea and the management response to the audit was that we would enhance this as we move to a better, more electronic system across the whole part of the planning system, more akin to what we have in building code services now. And then it would be easier. But I can say that we are at both a staff and a senior management level, we are actively, regularly engaging since this audit draft was given to us, looking at the applications that are in this post-approval process. And I think this is one of the most valuable aspects of the auditor's report, shining a light on the post-approval part of the work. Housing doesn't happen because we got the zoning done or we get the site plan done. There's a lot of other work, and the provincial government and the series of changes they have put forward in this space don't touch what happens after those key milestones of planning approvals. And the post-approval is messier and it's complicated, and it involves securities and insurance and agreements and what goes in the road allowance and a whole bunch of things that the auditor's report points out. And the agreements has proven to be an area that we need to do some work on. And as my colleague, the solicitor, has outlined, we are actively seeing some results with moving things forward. I think that it is, so the measurement and what you're seeing in the dashboard is one piece of it, but what we are applying is trying to find ways to limit what goes to an approval, or pardon me, goes to an agreement. So it's not just more staff, work faster in the system we have. It's look at, can we simplify the system we have to make better use of the staff time that we put to these. So can we use letters of undertaking, which we are actively doing and have been doing for several months as we try to find alternative ways. An agreement, for example, at site plan is very useful if you need to put something on title for the next decades. If you are trying to make the conditions of construction and all of the things that were in the approval, make sure they get done, a letter of a much more effective way and a lot faster process that does not involve our legal colleagues. So how do we use our legal colleagues in a more effective way? So all to say, we are measuring our progress. We are committed to sharing more of that publicly, and it is there now, and there will be more of that information as we move forward. And we are actively tracking where the blockages are in the system, and not only how to where we may need resources, but how do we use those resources more effectively and simplify the process where it's possible?
Thank you very much. Excellent response. That provides a lot more color, and I'm interested to see how this is going to play out over the next 6 to 12 months. I will know how it's working by the reduction in the number of calls from my office, both from internal and external stakeholders. So very, very interested in seeing this roll out, and I'll be sure to pipe up if I'm not seeing an improvement. Thank you very much.
We know that. Councillor Kitts?
Thank you, Chair. I did not have any questions for the Auditor General, but wanted to thank you and your team for another excellent report. To be honest, I was not overly surprised with the findings. It's consistent from what I've been hearing from the industry. I would say we are often threatened, for lack of a better word, that Ottawa's processes are slower and I guess particularly painful compared to other jurisdictions. The report says that the two biggest factors regarding the degradation of timelines was the changing legislation from the province and the complexity of intensification. Which I do think is important to note because for future conversations around this table. But my question to staff, I guess, is what other factors were most at play when you look at 2022, 2023, or that change from 2022 in 2023 and 2024? Because my team did pull comparative numbers from Toronto. And so, our audit says for site plan, 649 days to registration, 1.8 years. Toronto, it's 129 days. And plan of subdivision for Ottawa, it's 3.5 years and 9 months in Toronto. Those two factors, the changing legislation from the province and the complexity of intensification would also apply to Toronto. So I'm wondering what is happening in Ottawa that's unique.
Through the chair, I would say Toronto is a couple of years ahead of us in terms of doing a review of their approach to development review and thinking about how to fast track housing and how they work across departments and work together. A lot of what came out in the audit is very complementary to what you're going to see in the conversations that come out of the task force, the Affordable Housing Task Force and their recommendations and the staff response that would go with that. So I would say we are taking that, while the auditors drawn out some particular pain points, particularly like around agreements or subject matter experts providing advice, we're taking that same lens across the entire process, from the tire kicking at the front door to somebody actually being able to move in. And it is going to be in the really granular look at the process that we're going to find that those efficiencies and that ability to simplify the process, not just push everyone to go faster. Some of this is about asking for subject matter experts to provide a level of detail at the wrong part of the process. We ask everybody everything, maybe, and maybe some of that advice would be better when we're at a more fine-grained, detailed stage, for example. There's how we manage escalation, if there's conflicts between departments, and how we resolve those things. The auditor's report points out to some work we could do better in terms of documenting, because that work does happen. We do solve the conflicts, but the auditor points out that we should be a little more careful on how that gets documented in the file. I think the planning department, I come into this almost at my 90-day point, and fully aware, Councillor Carr, of what I was getting into, and quite excited by that. I come into this knowing and seeing firsthand, talking with staff, there's been tremendous efforts to find continuous improvements. And I think that we need to empower our staff and work with them to take reasonable risks while also making sure that we're protecting the the broader public interest that the city has and the process isn't perfect, and we absolutely need to look at it and see where we can find those savings. But I would say that even when the city does its best job on a file, there is still some really challenging market conditions here in Canada, in Ontario, in Ottawa. Right now, we are looking at 19,000 units that have building permits and are not yet built. And we know that about 7,800 units have been built, which is about a little better than half of our target for this year. So this is, I'm using numbers from July. That's as far as we have the data for. So about 7,800 units are under construction and would meet that that target that the province is setting for us, that they are moving forward. But there's an additional 19,000 that are some there. They're not all stuck in legal in an agreement, right? There's a lot of other things going on in this market, but I do believe, and I think that I share this belief with staff, that it is our job to do whatever we can to protect the interests of the city and ensure we build livable communities going forward, but not letting process be the barrier to getting housing done. So I think this audit, combined with where we're going to, the conversation we're going to have with council very shortly on the task force recommendations, sets us up very effectively to make the changes necessary to do our part.
Thank you very much. Your point is well taken that these are not the only factors. And you answered my next question, which was, you know, when you look at the flow chart for the development, it kind of looks like a pot of spaghetti. So I was going to ask about process improvement and efficiencies, but a very comprehensive answer to say that you're looking at that. So thank you. And just quickly, one question to Mr. Huxley. You said you will have 2 lawyers that will be dedicated to development review. Does that mean that nobody was full-time dedicated to development review prior?
Chair, that's correct. As identified in the audit findings, the work was spread across the group of planning. But what we've identified through this process and this resourcing analysis is to put 2 experienced lawyers focusing on that. As such, as the member is a member of ARAC, you will see a change in personnel that will be providing the legal services to that committee, for example, so that we pivot and put our resources into the development agreement, and then develop lawyers in the other areas, such as committee representation.
Okay, and you feel, I know you indicated there could be others, that you have 2 and you're looking at other, but do you feel two is sufficient for the level of work?
First, I think the 2 lawyers that I've assigned to this are the 2 most experienced lawyers I can think of for this work. So I think that addresses the question of dealing with the issue first and foremost now. And then the other adjustments that I made, we'll start developing lawyers internally. We have great lawyers in that team that can do this work, but the 2 will address the short term. And then again, thankful to the funding that we've received, I think that will get us through. And I'm going to be conducting an ongoing review of this analysis at various touch points throughout this remaining quarter and then into early 2026.
Okay.
Should there be any changes there, I will certainly consult with General Manager Wallace and the city manager and address those resourcing needs. But right now, I'm comfortable with the approach that we're taking.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for your responses. I just want to say I'm really glad the general manager mentioned about the number of units that have been approved and have not gone forward. I have literally thousands in my ward. And a big reason for that is, you talk about market factors, stage 2 LRT. They're waiting and they're building around transit. That could be part of it. And some of I'm finding files that are not even there on the Dev app anymore. They've disappeared and they were approved years ago. So that is a big factor. And I'm glad that you raised that because that has to be acknowledged. And as hard as you work, things are just, they stagnate. I appreciate hearing about dedicated legal staff. That is really important, and I'm really glad to hear that. So you've already answered that. I am interested in the infrastructure at development stage. That is something that is about, I see them as silos, and you know, there's a danger of not talking to each other when you're having a development in an area, especially for infill or intensification areas, where you have to look at what's around and is it adequate? And that's a question I always get from the public, especially for the people who live in that area and are going to see more intensification. How are we handling that? The first thing they say, is there enough water? Are you sure you can build a building here with the water mains? So I just want to know how that process is going to change and be more efficient.
Through the chair, absolutely agree. A house you can't hook up is not a house yet. And so we need to make sure we have the infrastructure in place. I would say we look to the infrastructure master plan, just like we look to the transportation master plan, to align with where we are putting density as per the zoning bylaw that's out for consultation now, and hopefully will reach a final stage by the end of this year. These major initiatives need to work together so that where we are directing the growth, we are actually able to service it. We are having, at the site-specific level, the applications get circulated right from the very beginning. We work hand in hand with the engineers in infrastructure to move things forward and to get that analysis into it. But I do think that even at a more senior level with my colleagues, we're having those conversations about what do we need to do if development does pick up and we start to see the kind of intensification that we're targeting, say for downtown or other areas. What do we need to do to make the servicing for sure line up, and how does that relate to our current plans, and what's the role of the private sector versus the city? So those are important conversations, and we are looking at how the new transportation master plan and then the hopefully soon to pass new comprehensive zoning bylaw would work together with the infrastructure servicing.
Thank you, and I appreciate that the recommendation also mentions recreation, culture, and facility services, which sometimes get forgotten and left behind. So appreciate that. The city is the sole shareholder of Ottawa Community Housing, and one of our most important developers in terms of affordable housing. And I do hear that there is issues with process. How are we helping to work to make affordable housing a priority with these recommendations? Because it's crucial. It's part of our goals for our housing and homelessness plan. And they get held up too. So how are we working closely with those partners?
Through the chair. So while the auditor's report did not distinguish between the client or the owner of the land trying to move a project forward, the task force recommendation did put some specific attention to the unique barriers that affordable housing developers would have, including what you're mentioning. So I would maybe defer that answer till that report is tabled, and I think there'll be more response in terms of what we can do to address that. I will say that at all levels in the organization, we're actively talking about the moment we're in as we look to next year bringing forward an updated housing and homelessness plan, and how do we recognize that not-for-profit developers, this might be not their main bread and butter. They may only do one project a year, and how do you help these smaller players who might have funding, and we need to think about that separately and distinct from the market housing that has its own concerns. So they are related because they have to go through the same planning process, but they have unique problems, and it is highlighted in the task force.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Hubley?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with Mr. Huxley, if I could. Thank you for that update. That's promising. That sounds like you've got a number of things underway to help address the issues that are so alarming here. One of the questions I have for you is, when you're doing these legal reviews of the planning files, what are you finding? Like, what's the trends or the themes here? Like, is it incomplete applications? Is that causing the delay, that you have to go back to planning to get more detail? Or, is there high-risk items being identified in here? Can you give us kind of a picture of what you find?
Chair, I'll start and maybe general manager may assist, but it's a cross section of various things. So, one of the items that I think we've identified it through the Housing and Innovative Task Force would be making sure that all the stakeholders, all parties involved, legal, planning, and external developers are working towards a common goal. So occasionally, we do see files where certain things are not complete and it has to go back a step or things like that. So that's the idea, is to try to address all those issues, but streamline things that we may not need. And so we're identifying, one example will be on the language we're using in our agreements. Can we streamline that to a more of a templated process? And so the general manager and I are working on that. We've reached out to the external development community to see if we can get some progress on modernized agreements so that we don't have this back and forth on what the wording is, as well as making sure we need truly what we need. And I think the general manager referenced, if we don't need a particular provision or we don't need a particular agreement, then why are we doing that? And I think that's what we're looking to accomplish through this process.
That sounds like you're taking more of a risk-based approach, which is what we've talked about in the past. So happy to hear that. And I'm hoping, do you have any indication of how the delay time is working? Like, are you already seeing progress in turning around files?
I think that will, time will tell. Certainly, I can say that we've heeded the findings of the Auditor General's report. I think we have had amazing collaboration and communication with the general manager and my office, and also with the development community. So I think now we need to see this roll out with our response to the recommendations, some of the great work that will come out of the task force, and see where we are in increments going forward.
Okay. Yep. Well, I had questions for you too.
Oh, I'm sure you do. So through the chair, I just want to add that coming into this role, I came in as the audit was in a draft stage and staff were starting to review it. But I didn't see the silos that the auditor talks about. And I think that's because the staff had already really taken to heart those recommendations that we need to work better together. And we're coordinating within the planning department so that we can speak with one voice when we engage with legal. Legal's working on their side, and we're coming together at staff levels, at senior management levels. It really is a lot of cooperation, because we recognize that if we don't fix this part of the delay, it's really impeding. Like, this is housing that has already been through committees. It's been approved by council. It's what everyone says we should move forward on, and we can't let it fail on a technicality at the end of the process. So we're very committed to this, and I see a lot of positive action. This is, you mentioned, coming back to do another study. Like, we don't need another study. The auditor's recommendations in this space were very clear, and we've been working on that all summer. So hopefully the industry will, to Councillor Brown's point, the industry will start to feel that as well.
Thank you for that answer. And I apologize. It was a natural reaction when you talked about things getting held up on a technicality. I had to look over at our city manager, because we're discussing some issues like that right now, that things are getting held up in the final stages due to technicalities. My questions to you based on this audit was, well, first off, I want to say how encouraging what you're saying is. I'm hearing it, and I think there's hope for the future here with these files, because the approach you're taking to it, I find it's refreshing. And so I welcome you here, and I hope we can keep you here and don't scare you away with some of the stuff that happens around here. My questions though are, I'd like to hear from you based on this audit. What are some of the roadblocks you're experiencing? Because you're coming in with great ideas. You've got a different perspective of things. I'm sure there's some roadblocks that are getting in your way, and maybe this is a place we can air that out and connect it to the audit.
Through the chair, Councillor, I would say that really looking at this audit in the context, I've said it already, but in the context of the task force report, which didn't maybe go as deep, but looked at the whole process and identifies a bunch of other areas for improvement, is together, this is a very comprehensive response that the city will be taking that I think can be very significant in terms of turning the channel on this. I really believe that if this was easy, the province wouldn't have walked back their legislation. Like it's not that there's some obvious things that if you come in and change, then it will make it better. Every municipality was struggling with this. I think that this will be found in the way we work together and at a very granular level. It's the how long does something sit on someone's desk? Who did they talk to? Did they feel that they were empowered to offer an alternative or think outside the box in terms of solving a problem? Are we making the normal way through the process the most rational, simple way, or do we drive people to find workarounds because the main way is too long and cumbersome? Like this is it's complicated and it's layered, and I think what is particularly useful in the audit is drawing everyone's attention away from the shiny balls that the province focuses on in terms of what they legislate in the timelines, and recognizing that getting housing built and making sure that the public interests are reflected in the decisions that the city makes is really, there's hundreds and hundreds of points along the way that involve so many different departments and staff and agencies and interests. It is much more complicated in implementation than the province and the Planning Act would maybe. So if you find the provincial planning part of it complicated, when you get into the weeds operationally, it's much, much, much more complicated. And I think the way forward is with staff that do that work every day. They're the ones who are going to help us identify that small change that would just make things simpler, that would make it easier. And so working with staff to with a common goal and North Star. We want housing built, and we want to do it in a way that we're going to be proud of in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So with that, I think we can, there's lots of advice from this audit and from the task force report that give us some places to focus on, but I'm confident that there's a willingness amongst staff and council to make that happen.
Thank you for that. There's items that you've mentioned in there that are both encouraging, but also some of that's alarming based on experience. I'm going to touch on it, and it's related to the audit where she talks about duplicate actions and lack of documentation. I'll give you a personal experience where we held a public meeting on a file, had a community come out. They really liked the changes that staff and my office had worked out with the developer, and we're looking forward to this going forward. There was at least 3 different planners assigned to that file in like less than a year. Somebody else gets the file and they come back to us and they can't find any documentation about that public meeting, so they want to do it all over again. Well, that doesn't go well for the public that gave up their night to come out and be heard about a file. Makes them feel we're not listening to them. And it slows the whole process down. So I really hope what's in the audit about keeping documentation about when meetings are and what the outcomes of the meetings and you know, the go forward with the files. I really hope we do something about that, because I wouldn't want to go through that again. The other thing that I'm finding, and it's super alarming to me, and I've been hearing about it, is where the province says, okay, you don't need to do these reports anymore. We're going to change these rules so that you can speed up your applications. And we have people here at the city that are saying, okay, Let's make up some new reports and start asking for new requirements that weren't there before. And that just slows everything back down again. If the goal is to get housing out, as you say, good housing, and we have steps in place, we've got, our building code services, I would say, is probably amongst the best in the province. We've got different ways to do this. You've got great planners on staff. Why do we have people sitting around trying to figure out ways to slow things down? And that's something that's really starting to irritate me. So is there something you can do about that?
Through the chair, I would say that I don't believe that staff want to slow it down, but they feel very principled about the part of the role they play, and they're trying very hard to make sure that comes through. But I do think we have to have clear and transparent rules, and we can't add things to the cart while the cart's been moving. So how we have that first conversation, how we frame what is required, what's enough in order to get in the door, and how we review. We can't keep adding things or changing our mind. That's destabilizing to the market, but it's also not fair to the process. Our team approach that we've put in place that the auditor mentioned is, I think, a really good safeguard against the staff turnover that you mentioned. So we now approach things with every file is a team, and different files, the teams get reconfigured so they learn from each other, but there would be a team approach so that there's never no one at the end of the phone to solve a problem or answer a question, which I think is really important. And we are our internal procedures do require the documentation that the audit has pointed out was lacking in some of the cases that they looked at. And so we are going back with further training and conversations with staff to make sure that it is always followed, because whether it's the landowner or the public, everyone needs to know exactly how things were done, and we can't miss pieces or redo pieces or not have the documentation for how the decision got made. So we completely agree with the auditor's concerns in that area, and but it is part of our normal process. It shouldn't be happening that way, and we're working with staff to make sure it doesn't.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to wrap up, and I'll just say that I'll carry this conversation on with you between now and the budget, but I'm really looking at some of the examples of where we're trying to create our own rules over and above what's in place, and I don't understand why we're doing that. So I'd like to talk more about that before the budget discussions get going. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Just slightly out of scope of what the audit covered, but while we're talking about the development processes and all the steps and the slowdowns, I'm wondering if you could help me understand what role the developer plays in some of these slowdowns as well, because like one of my colleagues, I think it was Councillor Brown, mentioned, we're always getting calls from developers saying staff are holding things up. I've been waiting days and days. Every day costs me $100,000, $150,000. So could you speak a little bit about the process in terms of like the completeness of the application? Does the quality typically match the staff's expectations? Like what effects does the developer's application and prepared documents contribute to some of these bottlenecks that we're seeing?
Through the chair. So absolutely, the quality coming in is an important part of moving swiftly through the process. I think it's both ways. We need to be very clear what is expected, and then they need to deliver on that quality so we can move forward. This was a part of the conversation at some of the meetings I attended with the task force, and I expect that their recommendations will speak to what onus is on the developer in terms of making sure their consultants put in quality effort. And I do think it is part of the delays. It's not the only part, but because there's some that the city owns, but it's part of the delays in the deemed complete process. And Councillor Hill put forward an inquiry on this that will be coming back in the fall as well, that we are looking into. But yes, you're correct. The good quality work makes the process work much faster.
Okay, thank you. And then also slightly out of scope, because it wasn't covered in the audit at all. But, the other thing I often hear about is that, the excessive delays in things such as the process to build coach houses or everything else. So even though it wasn't in the audit, will this be something that you're addressing in the work that's either done by the task force or as you're reviewing processes?
Through the chair, we're looking at every single part, all of it.
Okay, I imagine. Thank you very much. Glad you're here.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you very much, Chair. I was wondering if we could, in your analysis of the auditor's recommendations, get an understanding of whether there were any trends looking at the slowdowns of infill projects versus greenfield projects. I think we've seen that, there's perhaps more being built at the urban boundary than in infill. So as you're reviewing, both the authorities as well as the streamlining of projects, is there any way that we can try and advance those infill projects more quickly, given that that is the direction of our official plan?
Through the chair, I think that's where our comprehensive zoning bylaw that is out for final draft goes a long way. It is trying to set zoning standards that would make things as of right, which would mean that there's really two stages of planning approval before you get to the post-approval that the audit spoke to. There's the, whether it's a subdivision agreement in a greenfield scenario or whether it's an official plan amendment or a zoning bylaw change in an infill scenario. And then you have the more implementation crunchier parts where you have your site plan and in a rural context, an easement or something. If we get to a place where we have a modern zoning framework that reflects the official plan and identifies the expectation that we're going to see density along major corridors and near transit, that could eliminate an entire phase of the application process, that you could go straight to the details of that site at site plan. And if it's a small enough development, it wouldn't even need site plan. So I do think that modernizing our zoning framework will go a long way to encouraging and making it easier for infill to happen in the places that we want to see it happen. So I think that is a huge process shift. We need to make sure that the ancillary post-approval kind of approvals you need to make something happen in a as of right situation where they meet the zoning as laid out, that they don't get stuck in the rest of the process, which is what the auditor is highlighting. But I do think that zoning change will be really important to drive the density that we're looking for.
Yeah, I actually think the second part of your answer is more related to the question. That infill proposals come forward with a degree of complexity and constraint. I'm thinking of stormwater management or even water access as two examples. It could be tree retention. It could be those types of things that are a little more challenging in an infill situation. So as you're describing the team approach, do you have an eye to not only having coverage, but also having a degree of expertise and inventiveness that would be required in order to advance those proposals in a timely way? I know when we were talking about Bill 185, we had actually also talked about, or is it Bill 109, pardon me, where we were talking about some of the restructuring of the team approach, which is great. But I do think with some of the recommendations coming through the report on post-approval, I can see there being hangups in an infill situation more often, or perhaps with a greater deal of barrier or more barriers than some greenfield. So could you speak to that a little more?
Through the chair. Okay, thank you. I guess I misunderstood your question originally. So we are having conversations about community of practice. How do we share knowledge? There are some staff that would have a lot of experience in a situation, and others it might be the first time they've seen that in their area. There's a lot of cross-pollination across the geographies. The staff tend to move around the team, so they do talk to each other, and there is opportunities to come together. But we've been talking internally about how do we strengthen that so that we share that learning around what's happening in one part of the city to planners working in another part of the city. The zoning bylaw speaks to stormwater in particular, recognizing the infill situation, and we're in partnership with the infrastructure department. They're intending to bring forward some stormwater guidance in tandem with our zoning bylaw that would make it simpler in terms of how you would deal with stormwater in a particular infill scenario, kind of recognizing it's a different situation. And we see, so we're trying to learn from the experience of infill and the repeatable situations. How do we make that easier so that we learn from that history and we can make these decisions faster and give staff the guidance, the knowledge, the support so that they can replicate the best practices.
And with respect to the auditor's recommendation for, clear authorities, I was speaking with someone even just yesterday where they were saying, back in the day, if we were getting stuck on something, we would just be able to call X in the planning department and they would say, I'll get this figured out for you, Joe, and they would go away and fix it. I would assume that that's now part of why we have a fabulous new GM, so that you can sort of have that overview. But is that how you interpret sort of some of your role as well in that type of scenario, or are there other people within the department that have that sort of authority to get into those, if a project has a lot of great benefits to the city of Ottawa, is trying to accelerate it even faster?
Through the chair, there's thousands of units moving through the system at any given time, and the idea that that the only way it works is because Joe and Joe will make it happen isn't going to work. I know historically that I've heard those stories too, and you hear that in other municipalities. What we're trying to build is a effective team where you have a lead on the file. That lead is working with a team so that you can get your questions answered or deal with any issues that might come up in a timely way, that they are working with their partners across the subject matter experts in the various other teams. There's an escalation process so that if the developer is struggling with the answers they're getting, or we're having conflicting advice from maybe parks and infrastructure, and the two things they want doesn't actually physically work on the site in the same way, then how do we escalate that if it can't be resolved at a staff level? So I think what we need is a fine-tuned, highly functioning organization, so you don't have to go to one person. I would also say that I have a lot of respect and faith in our manager teams who run the different geographies of the city. They are very problem-solving mindset, and they are looking for solutions and learning from best practices, and so how we support them to support their team. So right now I think that we're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of trying to shift from a reactive, the city is the problem, you need to change. I fully agree that the city needs to make improvements, but we need to be in a proactive mindset. How do we change in a way that makes the job easier to get the outcomes that we know we need and see housing built that we're going to be proud of in the future? So it's an active conversation, and I think that the task force and this audit have been a good push that allows us to take a proactive and positive step forward, as opposed to what I think has been a very demoralizing and challenging couple of years, given all the provincial changes that have hit us. So I'm optimistic about how we can work going forward. And when I talk to the development industry, they will complain a lot about the process, but they say a lot of really encouraging things about our staff.
Appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Yeah, I feel like I have to ask this before we wrap up, but when we're making efficiencies, my residents would want to know, where's the consulting phase with them, with the public? And it's been, some view it as holding things up, but it's important when you're getting something new in your neighborhood, especially if it's quite dramatically different. The public would like to speak out as well. And I just want to know how that fits in when we're talking about the process. 3.1 talks about specific key performance indicators relevant to development application are not currently being reported to council and the public. The public wants to know where things are at, and they want to know if they, if they have an opportunity for input. It's a delicate subject. It's a delicate balance, but especially with infill, not so much with greenfield. So I just want to know how that's fitting in. Thanks.
So the director of planning seems otherwise preoccupied, so I'll just keep talking. So I will say that, of course, public input is an important part of the planning process. I think we also need to do that in an educational way so that they understand the modern context. It isn't, do you like this building, should we go forward or not? It's about, this is going to happen because it's allowed in our official plan, and it's a part of it's going to a height that is allowed in the zoning. But here's where there's some conversation. Here's where you can influence it. Do you see any challenges, and how do we find a way to mitigate that? So the public meeting is an important part of the process, and provincial government has changed appeal rights, so it's not as adversarial at the back end of the process, but it does still, there is statutory meetings in front of committee, there is public consultation that occurs. And when the sites are particularly complicated, like they have a heritage element or something, you see our staff really engaging with that community and trying to find the best way forward. So public consultation is structured by what the Planning Act and the province have set out, but it is an important part of the process. And Derek, do you want to add anything else?
My apologies, I got distracted. Could you repeat the question?
The question was around public consultation and how that fits in the process.
Sure.
To make sure it's done adequately.
Yeah, we did see some stepping back through Bill 109 on public consultation and the staff role in that. And certainly as we're looking to efficiencies, I think a lot of that is process oriented, not necessarily, we're not looking to strip back any further what we're doing on public consultations. We recognize that there's valuable input from communities and certainly from councillors as well. And so that is not something that I think we would look at removing any further than we already have. I think we're in line with where the legislation is. We're in line with where other municipalities are. And that's probably as far as we would want to go on that. So we would be looking at streamlining other parts of the process and how we work together with other departments and subject matter experts.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of quick questions. I'm hoping are really just yes, no answers. But the building code services audit was one similar where there was an answer by staff saying, well, software is going to save the day here. We're getting this whole new system and it's going to fix the day. Would you say that that is also part of your response as well, that there's been software issues that we have now fixed?
Yes, as it relates to the building code side. And I think that we're with this next round of automation, the planning and the building will, the whole development process more streamlined and integrated from a document perspective, from a managing the file perspective. It will be more seamless across the real experience for a client moving through, not just arbitrarily how our departments are set up.
Super, lovely to hear. My second question and last question is, again, maybe just yes or no. The KPIs, if Toronto's 2 years ahead of us, could we not sort of use theirs or put it into ChatGPT and get some really good ones?
So when I compare Toronto, it's more about the way they've organized their staff and how they deal with files and how they have managed their process. But from a KPI perspective, municipalities are all measuring the same thing. We want to see houses get built and how long are things at various stages of the process, and how long are they with the city versus how long are they with the client who then has to do their work in the back and forth at various stages. So it's not a mystery what the KPIs are. We just need to measure them. And some of that we have already put into the housing dashboard, and more of it will come as we move away from paper-based into electronic to make it easier to calculate that.
Wonderful. Okay, I will say to Audit Committee members, anyone else who's listening, that the special Finance and Corporate Services Planning and Housing Committee meeting on October 1st will have that task force report at it, and that's where it will be considered. So, everyone may want to make sure they attend that joint meeting. Okay, so seeing no further questions, let me just flip screens here. All right, so we have a recommendation that the Audit Committee receive the audit report and recommend that Council consider and approve the recommendations. Is it carried? Carried. All right, item 4.3, follow-up report, audit of enterprise risk management.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you just mentioned, the next report that we'd like to present today is a follow-up report on a past audit of the audit of enterprise risk management. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, lorsque la présentation est partagée. Merci. In June of 2022, we tabled the audit of enterprise risk management, which we will refer to today during the presentation as ERM. The audit confirmed that the city had established an ERM program that was supported by a formal policy and framework with processes in place to identify and manage most significant risks to the city. The audit also highlighted opportunities to further enhance the ERM program, and a total of 7 recommendations were issued as part of our audit report, one of which was undertaken by my office, and I'm sure councillors will be familiar with that one. That was the councillor training that we just provided in April and May. As a result of our follow-up work, opportunities to strengthen the program were identified, and as a result, new recommendations were issued. As such, we have chosen to issue a standalone report as a result of our particular work. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. As I just mentioned, during our follow-up audit, we identified a few key areas for continued improvement. Firstly, we noted that Council's responsibility for ERM were not currently defined in the ERM framework or policy, which may limit Council's ability to provide effective oversight. Best practices suggest that a governing body, such as City Council, should oversee the ERM program, help establish and monitor the municipality's risk appetite, and regularly review top risks. Additionally, subsequent to our audit, Council approved a reporting process which outlined the reporting of strategic corporate risks twice per term to Council. However, best practices recommend reviewing top risks at least annually to ensure timely oversight. As well, the current reporting process excludes top administrative risks. This may hinder a comprehensive and coordinated approach to risk oversight. As a result, we recommended that Council's risk management responsibilities be formalized within the ERM policy and framework, and should include a more frequent reporting cycle in order to review the top corporate risks to the city and status of their mitigation activities. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. I will now pass the presentation over to Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein. Merci.
Thank you. The second area of improvement is around the risk appetite and tolerance statements that were approved by City Council in 2023 following the ERM audit. Just as a reminder, risk appetite are the types and amount of risk that an organization is willing to accept in pursuit of its strategic objectives, as assuming the elimination of all risk is unrealistic. Risk tolerance are the boundaries of risk-taking that an organization is not willing to accept. While we understand that the risk tolerance and appetite statements are expected to be reviewed periodically, there is no defined schedule for this review and update. This can lead to outdated risk parameters that do not reflect the current operational environment, especially if there have been significant changes in strategy, external factors, or operations. Additionally, the risk tolerance and appetite statements use qualitative terms such as high, moderate, low, some, without clearly articulated definitions, which could lead to the statements being inconsistently applied and decisions made that are misaligned with the city's true risk appetite and tolerance levels. The statements are also framed only in the context of organizational risk, appetite, and tolerance, yet departments and services face different levels and types of risk. While there is an expectation outlined in the ERM policy for departments to develop their own risk tolerance statements aligned with the overall organization's risk appetite and tolerance, this has not yet been implemented. Lastly, reporting on risk appetite is recognized as a best practice in risk management. This practice helps identify any risks that fall outside the defined risk appetite and tolerance levels, allowing management to escalate any risk exposure that approaches or exceeds these levels. Since the city is in the early stages of incorporating its risk appetite statements into decision-making, a reporting mechanism has not yet been established. As a result, we have recommended that as risk appetite and tolerances continue to mature, regular schedule should be established for the review and update of these statements, that the statements be clearly articulated such that they are consistently applied, and that departments develop individual risk tolerance statements specific to their environments, but which align to the corporate level statements. Next slide, please. As part of implementing the recommendations from our audit report, the risk management unit added fraud to its ERM risk categories and completed an enterprise fraud risk assessment. These are positive initial steps. However, establishing a comprehensive fraud risk management program is critical to consolidating and guiding the city's approach to fraud risk management. One of the authoritative sources for this topic that we tend to call the 2023 guide defines a fraud risk management program as an organization's or overall set of processes and procedures, which includes some of the following components: fraud risk governance, fraud risk assessments, preventive and detective fraud control activities, fraud reporting mechanisms, fraud investigation protocol, and systems for monitoring fraud risk management policies and procedures. Although the city has incorporated elements of fraud risk management within its fraud and waste policy and employee code of conduct, and there are many controls in place to prevent and detect fraud, the city does not have a comprehensive documented fraud risk management program. Without such a comprehensive program that includes a formal governance structure, the city may be limited in its ability to effectively manage fraud risks. As a result, we issued a recommendation for the city to establish such a comprehensive fraud risk management program, including the formal assignment of responsibility for fraud risk management to a single executive within the city. Next slide, please. This last section focuses on the fraud risk assessment exercise that management completed last year. A comprehensive fraud risk assessment helps the city identify specific fraud schemes, assess their likelihood and impact, evaluate existing controls, and respond to reduce residual risk. While this first iteration of the fraud risk assessment was a good starting point, we found opportunities to strengthen the processes and improve the level of specificity of the analysis to support fraud risk management within the city. This included the identification of city-specific fraud schemes, the assessment of both inherent and residual risk in order to prioritize where mitigation controls are necessary, and the expectation to identify and test key mitigation controls. The final area we commented on was the ongoing maintenance of the fraud risk assessment. We understand that there is an expectation that the assessment will be refreshed periodically. However, the expected frequency is undefined, including who the results will be reported to. As a result of our observations, we have recommended that as the fraud risk assessment process does mature, these areas be formalized. This concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions committee members may have related to this follow-up report.
Thank you very much. I'll note that we didn't have any correspondence. We don't have any delegations on this item. Questions for the Auditor General? I don't see any questions for staff on this item. Okay, I don't see any hands up on that either. All right, so we have a report recommendation here that the audit committee receive the audit report and recommend that council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this item carried? Carried. All right, so we will move in camera and Vice Chair Hubley. Councillor Kavanaugh. Okay. Let me tell you what this one is. There we go. Oh, no, wait a minute. This one here, resolve in camera. This one. Okay.
Be it resolved that in accordance with procedure by law, number 2025-100, the audit committee resolve in camera pursuant to subsection 13(1)A, the security of the property of the city based on the rationale set out in the respective legal implications section of the report, Office of the Auditor General, follow-up report, audit of cybersecurity, file number ACS 2025 OAG BVG 012, and Office of the Auditor General, follow-up report, cybersecurity investigation, file number ACS 2025 OAG BVG 013. These reports will not be reported out. Thank you.
All right, is that motion carried? Carried. Is that motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you. We will now resolve in camera and we'll be back in open session when we are done.
Audio test.
Test. I can hear.
All right. Okay, for the benefit of those joining us online, the Audit Committee just met in camera to consider two reports submitted by the Office of the Auditor General. Item 5.1, follow-up report, cybersecurity investigation. Item 5.2, follow-up report, audit of cybersecurity. These matters will not be reported out as they relate to subsection 13(1)A, the security of the property of the city. During the in-camera session, no votes were taken other than procedural motions and/or directions to staff. So, on the 5.1 motion, it is that the Audit Committee receive the audit report and recommend that Council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this item carried? And then for item 5.2, that the Audit Committee receive the audit report and recommend that Council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this item carried? Okay, carried. Information previously distributed was the Ottawa Police Services audit of staffing. No one's asking to lift it. All right. Notices of motion. Are there any that we have heard about? No. Any inquiries? None that I've heard about. All right. So, I need a motion to adjourn. No, I guess I don't need a motion to adjourn. We don't do that at committee. All right. So we are adjourned. Our next meeting is Friday, November 28th, 2025. We are adjourned.